We knew this team, this OU men's basketball team, was going to have to answer some questions heading into another gauntlet Big 12 season. And after a tough Wednesday night game where OU falls at TCU 80-71, it turns out there are still some questions this team has to answer, particularly with a road matchup in Lawrence, Kansas coming up in just a couple of days. We are here to break all of that down. This is another episode of In the Paint. My name is Jesse Crittenden. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Brody Lusk. Brody, we said coming into the week that this is a heck of a two-game stretch, both on the road, two good teams. TCU has given OU problems the last couple of years, and we saw that come to fruition last night. A game that OU, I think, really dominated for a lot of the first half, where they controlled a lot of the first half, but they stumbled to in the first half. They went down with a 6-point lead, or they went into halftime with a 6-point lead. JV McCollum hits a couple of threes to open the second half, and then it was kind of all TCU from there. Just what were your initial thoughts from pretty tough loss in Fort Worth?
It starts with the turnovers. I think there was 14 turnovers, and a lot of them were just bad turnovers. And you got to give credit to Milos Uzan. He played an excellent game, 10 assists and 1 turnover. But you had Javian McCollum, who had 5 or 6 turnovers, and there was just a lot of just ugly turnovers in there. And then you had Sam Godwin, who got in foul trouble and kind of put OU in a hold there. It wasn't just Godwin. It was Owe, who had 2 in the first half, who sat the majority of the first half due to the fouls. Also happened against Iowa State. And then Jalen Moore had 3 fouls for the majority of the game. And then also, they couldn't buy an open 3-point jumper for most of the game. You mentioned those 2 that McCollum hit. But after that, McCollum kind of went cold from behind the arc until there was like 1 minute left in the game. And particularly, LaTre Darthur, he couldn't get anything to fall. 0 for 6 from behind the arc, and he had a lot of good looks. And so that definitely plays a factor into it. And I think, 3-point shooting and turnovers would be really the 2 main reasons Oklahoma lost to TCU. And I did the keys to the game over on OU Insider before the game. And one of the things was you can't let anyone on, any of TCU's point guards have a big game. And Avery Anderson, I'd consider what he did a big game. He did hit 2 3-pointers, which he was going into the game as a 20.3 point or 20 percentage from behind the arc, and he goes in and knocks 2 down. That's just kind of bad luck. Sometimes players are going to make big shots. So, Oklahoma, it was an ugly game. I think that's pretty much the easiest way to describe it.
Let's break down the turnovers a little bit more, man, because you mentioned that. And look, we did a video before the Iowa State game, and we were talking about questions that this team needed to answer, or questions about this team heading into conference play. And I think turnovers was the main one. And you look at last night, they had 14 turnovers, which is not great, but 12 of them came in the first half. TCU outscored OU 25-11 on points off turnovers. In a game you lose by 9, when you lose the points off turnover battles by 14, that's the game. And there's other stuff that went into it, but that's the game right there. And you also have to give TCU credit for not turning the ball over. Only had 7 turnovers on the night, so OU had double the turnovers and half as many points off turnovers. And you mentioned it, JV McCollum was 6 turnovers. It's pretty clear what TCU wanted to come out and do. They were really aggressive in pick and rolls, really for a lot of the game, but especially in the first half. In that first half, OU did a good job of hitting the big man on the short roll. They were getting really good offense out of that. But TCU kept on ratcheting up the pressure, especially as the game went on. And to me, Brody, the thing that was a little concerning was not only just that there were so many turnovers, especially in the first half, but it felt like there were a few turnovers that were just like, what are you doing? What pass are you trying to make? Is it the crowd noise? Are you getting sped up? Like, that's, to me, it felt like at times this team lost its composure a little bit.
If it was the crowd noise, they might have 30 turnovers on Saturday. because I mean, I don't think that was that great of a crowd, but it very well could have been the crowd noise because that was the first road game they played. Were they rattled? That's definitely a good question to ask. But I think TCU did a really good job speeding up JV McCollum. And King McClure pointed that out on the broadcast. It's a good point. McCollum, his turnovers were just, they're kind of bad. And he just there was one time he had an easy layup and he tried to alley oop it to Jalen Moore. Take the
Yeah.
points. There's
Yeah.
just a lot of turnovers like that. And McCollum, he had a lot of bad moments. He also had some good moments. And then you look on it on the other side, the other guard, Milos Uzan, he didn't get sped up. He played under control and played a great game. So McCollum, that was his first Big 12 road game, only his second Big 12 game. Teams are going to try to find, different ways to defend him. And if I was an opposing team, I'd go out there and do the same thing TCU did, because while he did score 17 points, he didn't play that good.
No, you're right, and there is one bright spot from this game, and that is Milos Uzan, who had a really good game against Iowa State, and I mean again last night, 13 points, 7 boards, 10 assists. He's really kind of developing into an all around player that kind of stuffs the stat sheet a little bit. So that is one positive to take away. But then the other thing, man, outside shooting. That was another question we had. You mentioned it just a bit ago, but I mean even Javian didn't play that well. He was still 5 of 9 from 3. The rest of the team outside of him, 2 of 16. 2 of 16.
In the
You
bench was, I
can't.
think, 0 for 11.
Mm-hmm. You can't. That's just not going to get it done.
No.
Like shooting 7 of 25 overall isn't going to get it done. But if everyone outside of Javian can't buy a bucket from 3, OU's not going to get no. We don't need to overreact. It's 2 games in a conference play, but we said coming into conference play, if this team doesn't knock down shots consistently, they're not going to win a bunch of games. We just saw that last night, and I think that was the hard part too. Is a lot of those looks were open. They were open, and you mentioned, I mean, Latre. It's weird to go 1 of 7 from 3 against Monmouth, then to go 3 of 4 against Iowa State. Now 0 of 6 last night. And it wasn't just him. I mean, Rivaldo Soares missed all 3 of his looks. John Hughley again, 0-2 from 3. He's shown a little bit of a mid-range jumper, but I don't know if that 3-point shot is consistent. But Brody, I gotta tell you right now, if the guys outside of Javian can't knock down shots, this is going to be a long Big 12 schedule for this team.
It is. And touching on Los real quick, I think he needs to be more aggressive. His next step is to be someone who can go out there and get you 25 points. He shot 12 shots, 1 of 3 from behind the arc. He needs to probably shoot a little bit more threes. You'd rather him shoot threes than some of the other guys that are taking them right now. And he probably needs to stop shooting just 12 shots. He needs to shoot more than 12 because he's shooting good shots. And then you talk about the 3-point shooting. Yeah, John Hughley was 0 for 2. Sometimes he had good moments. I thought he actually played really well.
He played well.
And he was clearly very tired. I mean, it was pretty clear around the 12-minute mark of the second half, he was gassed. But the one complaint is sometimes when he's taking those threes, now one was kind of a late in the shot clock. The other one, sometimes if he would just be more patient and not shoot it until late in the shot clock from behind the arc, things would be good. And he had a lot of moments where he was actually very composed and he took a floater, which I thought was a pretty good shot. But, with him, has he? I don't think he's made a 3-pointer since the team was in San Diego, or maybe he made 1. But I did think there was improvement with him. Other than that, Owe only 6 points, and it was ugly. He was 2 for 8 from the field. Teams are really starting to figure out how to defend him, and they're starting to cut off the driving lanes that used to be there in previous games. So for me, I think Owe needs to trust his jump shot more. Now, it's crazy I'm saying that because he's not – you don't think he's the best 3-point shooter, but he's shooting 70%. I think he just needs to trust it a little bit more, and if it doesn't start falling, then you stop going it. But sometimes he's dribbling too much.
No, I agree. That's going to be the constant battle with him is teams are going to dare him to shoot. They're going to dare him to drive into a crowd. And Big 12 defenses with time to scheme and watch film, they're going to have game plans specifically against him. And it is now, I mean, we're 2 conference games in. He's 2 of 10 from the field in 2 conference games. So that's going to be the constant battle for him. And then I think The other question for me, man, from this game, looking moving forward in a broad picture sense, is I'm really curious to see what this rotation looks like moving forward because Porter Moser has talked a lot about having 8 starters and meaning his 5 uh, regular stable starters plus Hughley and Darhard and Suarez off the bench. But I'm curious because you look at last night and Suarez, who had a couple of he had a couple of decent rebounds, wasn't his best game, but in 23 minutes he's only a -2. That's not bad. Hughley, we mentioned, 14 points, 4 boards, nothing wrong with that. I think Darthard that's the guy that I'm looking at because you look at him last night, 21 minutes, he's a -18. That's really bad. And again, 1 point, 2 boards, 3 fouls, a turnover. I just wonder, I think one, it's pretty clear to me, you mentioned like Hughley's fatigue. I think it's going to be pretty easy for if Porter Moser is stuck on these 8 guys. How much is fatigue going to start becoming a factor? And 2, if Darthard's not hitting shots consistently, does Porter need to look elsewhere? And to me, in my mind, that means someone like Caden Cooper, a true freshman that, obviously Big 12 life in the Big 12 for a true freshman can be really tough. I think he's pretty raw, but there's no denying the athletic ability. There's no denying the natural basketball IQ he has. I don't think you can afford to not play him just because he's a freshman. Now, if he's not ready, then that's one thing. But if Darhard's not hitting shots, to me, you got to look at someone like Caden Cooper, right? I think he's a guy that could give this team something they need, or at the very least, don't be so stuck on an 8-man rotation. Be willing to play a 9th or 10th guy.
Yeah, I thought about this quite a bit last night, and I think not only if Darhard's not shooting threes would it benefit to play a guy like Cooper, but they're in a lot of foul trouble. And, this could give you more time. If Oweh gets a foul, you can put Cooper in instead of playing, Soares and Darhard so many minutes, or, it just gives you more flexibility. I definitely would be shocked if they don't go to 9-man rotation about a week from now. I'm just wondering, what do you want to do? When do you want to get Cooper in? Because do you want his first really true Big 12 game to be in Allen Fieldhouse? So I do think next week sets up pretty well. You have West Virginia and Cincinnati at home, 2 good teams. Every team in the Big 12 is good, but that's probably a better time to get Cooper in. Now, it's this very, very similar situation to the Otega-Oweh situation last year. Oweh didn't really play any meaningful minutes. Athletic, he'll bring a spark. That's kind of how I see Caden Cooper. Cooper, I think, he's a better defender than Oweh was last year. A lot of people, coming out of high school said he was the best shot blocking wing they've ever seen. And, probably the most athletic guy on the team. And with Darthard last night, he didn't even defend well. He usually, when he has not shot well, which has been quite a bit of games, he's made up for it at least a little bit on the defensive end. That wasn't the case last night. He wasn't playing that well defensively. So I think if Moser could get Caden Cooper into the rotation, it would very much benefit Oklahoma just to go 9 men. Maybe you're only playing them 10 minutes a game, but he would bring in 10 really solid minutes. I think there's a discussion to be had about maybe letting him use his fouls as opposed to Sam Godwin or Otega-Oweh, right? Like if he gets in foul trouble, just take him out the game. So I think he could come in and he could really bring a spark because he'd play athletic, he'd play fast. Now, my question is, how ready is he defensively?
No, Otega didn't really play at all until down the stretch when I think the team was just desperate to find something, right? They were struggling, losing a bunch of games. I just think it's going to be interesting because Porter has been consistent in the idea of having 8 starters because 8 guys are playing a ton of minutes. Godwin only played 12 minutes because he was in foul trouble last night, but outside of him, everybody that got into the game played at least 21 minutes. And that's a lot of minutes. Like if every guy is playing 20 or more minutes, that's a lot of minutes. And I think you're right. I think it can be as simple as you throw him in there for 10 minutes. It doesn't necessarily need to be if Darthard's not hitting, then we go to Caden Cooper. But at the same time, I am going to be interested in watching Dart Hard moving forward. Can he make shots? Can he be consistent? And does this team need to go to Caden Cooper? Just to see what he does on the floor. But you're right. I don't think Lawrence, Kansas this weekend is the right time to do that. Probably not. And speaking of that, man, that's after a loss on Wednesday, this is now we move forward to an OU Kansas matchup that is pretty interesting because OU hasn't won in Lawrence in over 30 years. And Kansas was just shocked last night by UCF 65-60. So it's a little bit of a tough spot for OU to be in, to not only be coming off a loss, but you're heading to Lawrence, Kansas, where you're going to find a Jayhawks team that is also coming off a loss. That's a pretty tough situation for OU to walk in to. But Brody, when you're looking at this matchup, it's a top 10 matchup. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
You're going to have to be up by about 10 points down the stretch, even more if Oklahoma wants to come out with a win, because everyone knows how Allen Fieldhouse is. If you watched the game last week against TCU, they get some calls to go their way. And there is some controversial calls. They got Hunter Dickinson, who's one of the best at getting to the free throw line. Kevin McCullough, really good second, third option. DeJuan Harris, in my opinion, the best point guard in college basketball. And then they've got KJ Adams. So they got two elite big men. But after that, my concern with this Kansas team, watching them last night, they don't really have anybody after those four guys. They play Elmarco Jackson, true freshman, and he hasn't really done much this season. Johnny Furphy is another freshman that they'll play. He hasn't really done much. So to me, I don't think Oklahoma is going to stop Hunter Dickinson, but if you could keep him out of 30 points, and maybe you'll have a shot at winning the game. But, it's an incredibly good Kansas team, but I don't think they're as good as their ranking. I think they're number one in luck in KenPom. Maybe last night changed that, but I know for a fact going into the game, they were number one in luck. So the extremely battle-tested team, they played a lot of really good teams, and it's an old team. So for the most part. So it'll be an extremely difficult game for Oklahoma. That crowd's going to be amazing. So Oklahoma will just have to come out and be firing on all cylinders if they want to go out and win this game. And they've been in it for, I think, every single year for the past couple of years until
the last 2 years. It's been good games in Lawrence.
Yeah.
It's been good games. I mean, even 2 years ago, it's a Jordan Goldwire missed shot at the buzzer, and OU lost by 1. That is the thing. It's been kind of weirdly competitive. OU's been weirdly competitive in Allen Fieldhouse, and I think I agree with you too. I think this Kansas team, look, so TCU and Kansas played last weekend. TCU lost that game by 2. But, again, that's like you mentioned, you want to be up big going down the stretch, because if not, it's going to be hard to get calls. Crowd noise becomes a factor. But you look at the statistics for Kansas this year, man, they're not overly impressive. They're 8th in the conference in offense. They're 8th in the conference in defense. Their turnovers, they're middle of the pack. They do shoot the ball really well. They're 2nd in the conference in field goal percentage, but this isn't like a dominant oh my gosh, it's Kansas type of team. They're good. They're really good, but this isn't a team that OU needs to be afraid of. But I'm looking at the Kansas UCF box score last night. What that game came down to was turnovers. Yeah. Kansas had 18, UCF had 13, and UCF scored, and UCF won the points off turnover battle by 6 in a game Kansas lost by 5. So to me, again, it's going to come down to turnovers. But I think if you're OU, my biggest worry from the TCU game is the defense wasn't great, especially in the second half. You cannot. The defense has to be better against Kansas. It's just got to be better.
Yeah, they're going to have to figure something out. What happens when Godwin or Hughley goes into foul trouble? Because in my opinion, it's inevitable. One of your bigs is going to get 2 fouls when you're playing against Hunter Dickinson. And even KJ Adams he was their center last year, and now he's, they're 4. So they're incredibly big. Oklahoma's going to have to find a way to defend Hunter Dickinson. That's something that's incredibly tough to do. And he is a little bit banged up per Bill's self, but it shouldn't be an issue that really affects his game too much. Last night against UCF, Hunter Dickinson had 4 fouls with, I think, like 8 minutes left to go. He was in foul trouble for a big portion of the game, and that forced Kansas to go into their bench, which is not good. And that's why I think UCF was able to finish that game and play the way they did. They also had a lot of guys make a lot of big shots, and that's what Oklahoma's going to have on Saturday. And I think it's really interesting because both teams are coming off a loss. If both teams were coming off a win, you would say, hey, number 3 versus number 9. Both teams coming off wins on the road in the Big 12, which are incredibly tough to come by. But both teams are coming off a loss. So I think both coaches will, have those teams ready to play. And it should be a fun game, but it's going to be incredibly tough for the Sooners.
Yeah, I think for Oklahoma, I'm really going to be curious to see how Kansas comes out and defends Javian McCollum. I'm going to be curious to see, like you mentioned earlier, does Los come out if his shot's falling, if he's having a good game, is he a little bit more aggressive? I think you're going to need someone to step up and not be afraid and hit big shots. That's what you're going to need. And honestly, it seems like that guy might be Los.
Yeah.
At least as with how they've played the last couple of weeks or the last couple of games. But this is a huge test for Oklahoma because you lose this game, all of a sudden you're 1-2 in conference play. You fall out of the top 10 in the AP poll, and now you're battling uphill. If you
Yeah.
fall 1-2 in conference play, now you're battling uphill, and this is what's happened to OU in the past. Now again, it's still early. If they lose on Saturday, that doesn't mean the season's over, but I think stuff starts to feel. I don't know. Panic's not the right word. Panic's too strong of a word. But if they lose this weekend, I think you do. I think you do start to get a little nervous, right? And I think all of a sudden there starts to become pressure to really, you look at next week. All of a sudden you need to win both those games to feel good.
Yeah, and this is really a very interesting matchup because I don't think Oklahoma matches up well down low. But when you look at, you mentioned how they're going to defend Javian McCollum, their best perimeter defender is probably Kevin McCullough. And if they opt to put McCullough on McCollum, that's going to create a huge mismatch for Otega Oweh because they would have to put one of their smaller guards, Harris or Elmarco Jackson, on Oweh. Will Oweh step up? He hasn't in Big 12 play so far. But if he could come through and get 10, 12 points, that would be huge for Oklahoma. And if Kansas doesn't opt to go with McCullough on McCollum, you're going to have McCollum guarded by, Jackson or Harris, and he can beat those guys. He is a very good offensive player. And then you also have using. So I think they need to, bottom line, they need to attack Elmarco Jackson. True freshman, hasn't played that well. He hasn't scored that much. You got to attack him. And whoever your weakest defender is, you got to put him on him. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how the game plays out. I do think someone's going to have to really have a big game, whether that be Uzan or McCollum or Oweh. Someone's got to step up. You're not going to go steal a road win. We saw it last night. You're not going to go steal a road win if someone doesn't step up and play a really good game. That's just, it's always going to be like that.
No, you're right. And really, this is the stakes are pretty big for Oklahoma. If you get a win, all of a sudden that's huge because this is probably OU's toughest game on the schedule in terms of opponent being on the road. And then all of a sudden the loss against TCU doesn't feel that bad. You feel good moving forward. Plus you get the first win in Allen Fieldhouse in over 30 years. If you lose, all of a sudden, now we put this team in facing adversity really for the first time this season. Should be really fun to watch, Brody. Saturday, 1:00, ESPN Plus, I believe. Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that ridiculous? It's a top 10 matchup.
It's probably the best game on the Saturday slate. And they put it on ESPN Plus. I don't get it.
Yeah, I completely agree, and especially with Wednesday being on ESPN2. I don't.
Makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. And I know NFL playoffs and stuff start this weekend, but still, it's a top 10 college basketball Big 12 matchup, no less. But yeah, it'll be on ESPN Plus. I will actually be in attendance. I will be at Allen Fieldhouse, so I'm pretty excited for that. I went 2 years ago, and it was incredible. It really is an incredible environment. But we'll have everybody covered over at ouinsider.com. You'll find story and notes from me. You'll find player grades from Brody, as always. And we'll be back here for another episode of In the Paint next week to break down everything that happens in Lawrence and what is one of the biggest games of the season for Oklahoma. Make sure to like and subscribe the OU Insider YouTube channel. You'll find all kinds of content here, all things basketball, all things football. Softball starts in less than a month. A lot of things going on right now. But until then, we'll be back next week to break down what should be a pretty interesting matchup in Lawrence, Kansas.